everyone. Good evening. My name is Crystal Fletcher. As George mentioned, I am the host of All About Canadian Books, and I am so thrilled to be here this evening on behalf of CFG Books and conducting this interview with Julie Barlow. Before we start, I would love to tell you more about our very special guest. Julie Barlow has been working as a magazine writer, nonfiction author, and French English translator for 3 decades. She has published 8 books, including the Bonjour Effect, The Secret Codes of French Conversation Revealed, which was published by St. Martin's Press, co-authored with her husband and writing partner, Jean-Benoît Nadeau. Her first book, 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong, and I love that title, Julie, became an international bestseller translated into 6 languages. Julie's newspaper and magazine articles have appeared across Canada, the United States, and Europe in the New York Times, Boston Globe, the Globe and Mail, the Christian Science Monitor, and many, many more. She's a regular contributor to Quebec French-language news magazine, L'actualité, and Quebec business magazine, Gestion, and a regular translator for TheConversation.ca. Excuse me. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Julie Barlow for our 3rd CFG Books author interview, and we'll be chatting about Julie's very comprehensive guide to self-employment, going solo, everything you need to start your business and succeed as your own boss, which was written also with Jean-Benoît Nadeau and published by Sutherland House Books. Welcome, 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 Julie.
Thank you, Crystal. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction.
Well, as I was saying, it is an absolute thrill to have you here. And before we kick things off, if we could just find out a little more about you, Julie, that would be fabulous. Now, you're from a middle class, working class family, and running your own business was really not on the list of options for careers. So please tell us, how did you become self-employed?
Yeah. Well, I think I became self-employed. The truthful answer is, it was not really on my ideas either. It wasn't that I had a driving passion growing up. Some kids have that. I didn't. But I came of age and finished my university studies at a time where the unemployment rate was very, very high. I wanted to work in writing, and I really didn't have any other options. So I decided that university education, doing a PhD wasn't for me. I tried it. So I just kicked off a career, and I just decided to get down and try it. I really wanted to do a magazine writing, and I had to figure out sort of building everything from scratch. Now, I got to say, I learned later that my father indeed had sort of spotted me as somebody who would probably run her own business someday. I didn't know that. So then I thought, okay, yeah, and of course, as time went on, I realized that I definitely had the stuff for it. The people who last as self-employed workers, it's because, they've got the stuff. But sometimes you don't really discover that until you're in the process of it. So the book, I hope, will inspire people to find their inner self-employed person, which might not, be very obvious to everybody.
Before we talk more about your book, what was the inspiration behind going solo?
Yeah. Well, I guess the original inspiration behind it was a business decision. The original book was written in French, and my husband, with all of his, raised as by an entrepreneur, all of his self-confidence, published the French version of this 25 years ago, or maybe going on 30 years, I can't remember. So it's called in French, the Guide du Travail Autonome, the Self-Employed Worker's Guide. And this was a pandemic project. I realized that I was sitting on some valuable material. I'm speaking strictly like as an entrepreneur now. I was sitting on this valuable material, and that had sold very well for decades. And we were just sitting on it, and I thought, okay, now's the time. I had some time on my hands, And so I just started translating it. I just dug in and started translating it. And in the process, it's a story we can unfold when we're talking about agents and so on, but I did manage to find a publisher for it when I'd finished translating. It was one of the rare times when I decided to go ahead and do the work before I had a sort of guaranteed market for it. But I was very confident about it. I mean, it's been a very useful guide. It's sort of a classic here in Quebec, the French version, and hopefully the English version will become that way as well. The philosophy of the book, though, and I think the reason that it's been so successful in French, and as we talk, everyone will see all my lists of lists and all the things, like there's a lot of practical information based on these decades of experience that we've had as writers. But the basic idea is like teaching you not to think like an employee. And I think that was something that it's very hard for everybody starting out, no matter what business they are. And I see this when I'm talking about the book over and over, even from kids who really have young people who have a real like fiber for entrepreneurial stuff. They tend to not see themselves as the boss. And that's sort of the string that goes in everything that we talk about in this book. And it, goes from really the basics, making a business plan, developing that, the art of negotiation, we follow through housekeeping, managing taxes, we touch on everything. And it's always like, you got to be in the driver's seat. You got to put yourself there. That can be a hard thing for when you're starting out. Actually, it can be a hard thing when you're in the middle of your career too, which is what some people who picked up and enjoyed this book are people who have been self-employed for quite a while.
And that's, I mean, I can see it so perfectly as a resource, Julie, that, everyone has on their bookshelf and pull it out like, oh, because it really is comprehensive. Okay, so, what do I want to know about GST or HST or, bad clients? Like you really, how to avoid them. You really do cover everything. And it doesn't matter what stage you're at in your career, there's something in going solo for everyone. It's a great, great resource.
Thanks, I hope so.
Now, after almost 4 decades of experience writing, and this is just incredible, 3,000 articles and columns,
Yeah.
15 books, TV and radio documentaries, and giving hundreds of seminars and workshops on freelance writing. I mean, that's an incredible volume, Julie. What would you consider to be your epic career moment?
That's a funny, like a really hard question to answer. But first of all, full disclosure, the numbers that you're quoting are all of our stuff together. That's 2 people. So full disclosure.
Still impressive.
Thanks. But we added it all up. It's part of it's part of our comes from our press back. So we have, but yeah, we've been working and the 4 decades is actually, I've been working for 3 decades. He's been working, we have almost 6 decades together. So the epic moment, yeah. There've been a lot of them. And I've had a lot of careers, I've worked I started out as a magazine journalist. I moved into becoming an author. And then all of these other things, the speaking and all that sort of came out of being an author. The screenwriting, the radio, all of that was based on stuff that, was material I developed as an author already. And then I picked up a translator thing late. The translating came a little later in my career. But the epic moment, I guess the really like moment in my career that I just was like, wow, this is working, this is really working finally, was after my first book, 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong. And the book did really well right out of the gate. And we made a smart decision, which was to start writing a second book while the juices were flowing and while the cash was coming in. Like we had to jump into it, and that was it was a really great moment in our lives. Like it was working and we had money coming in, and then based on that, we were able to negotiate a really good contract for our second book and sell simultaneously rights in Canada, the UK and the US at the same time. So it that was the moment where I was just like, wow, this is it. Now, of course, nothing lasts forever, right? And all freelancers have to deal with that. And even people, and lots of people I know who've had a really early success, the lesson that you should all remember, it's great, enjoy it, but things change in freelance, things change in every business. Nothing ever stays. You're never going to stay on some perfect plateau where things are flowing. The publishing industry changed a lot. Our second book didn't do as well as a book, but generated a whole bunch of other money for us in subsidiary things, and led to other projects, and speaking for one thing. But it was it's a shock. And I think the mistake I might have made, I think we all, like, when it starts working really well, we think, okay, it's working, it's great, it's going to stay this way, it never does. And you have to be ready to pivot. And I guess like that's what you do your whole freelance career, is like, you got to have you got to see what's coming. You got to be open to change. Just the technological change over my career has just been unbelievable. And you have to like be ready for low periods, because they're going to come. So that's kind of a sad way to answer your question, Crystal, but I think it's important for everybody to understand it's okay. There's going to be like times where you're going to be like, oh, why am I doing this? And there are going to be times when you want a job, and there have been times when I've wanted a job. I'll be honest with everybody. It's part of the ups and downs of this business, But the good news is there's always change brings opportunity, and you just have to find it and be open to it, and then ready to do the work to make the best of it. That's a long answer to your question.
And certainly, Julie, as freelancers, like, negotiations is a big part of our industry. And I understand that for 10 years, you worked very hard to get your literary agent to successfully secure a new deal with your US publisher for the updated version of your bestseller, 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong. Like, how did you negotiate this?
Well, yeah. Negotiation and my literary agent are two types of things. And one of the reasons that I have a literary agent, of course, is to negotiate. The thing I had to do to get this deal was switch agents. In a nutshell, and find somebody who understood what I was about. So I don't want to switch your question back to like away from negotiation to agents, but it's really,
Okay.
really important point for anybody who's thinking of getting an agent. It'll pay off because you'll pay them a percentage of your work, but they will get a much bigger percentage than that, right? So agents for me have always paid off. But I just was speaking about how things change. And when I started my career, it was important to have an agent who was having coffee with editors in New York City. I kid you not. Like, that was what we were told we should be doing. And we did. We found an agent through a long process that, if we had an hour and a half tonight, I would go over the whole process. It was laborious. But we were very careful to choose an agent who we felt understood us at the time and what we wanted to do. And he unfortunately retired and passed his agency on to somebody who we liked but didn't understand us. And among the mistakes that I've made as a freelancer, one of them was I should have understood quickly that he wasn't really getting what we wanted to do. And part of the problem was that the industry has changed, and being a New York agent is no longer any guarantee of anything. That's not how connections are made anymore. And it's a much more splintered, fluid market. And trends happen really quickly, and things change quickly. And he wasn't following the trends, and he didn't understand my local market. And that's a really big, important thing, especially for Canadians. I would not, in the climate now, necessarily recommend to anybody to be shooting for a New York literary agent, because I needed someone younger, because he was kind of not moving with the trends, you know. I wanted somebody who was younger. I wanted somebody who understood my local market and who had a broader view of my career and what was important. And in the end, I published Going Solo, and you didn't mention it. It's a Canadian book with a US edition as well. So it was important for me to have this agent who could do everything. He understands my European work a little because he's got roots there. He understands the Canadian market very well and the US market. So that was the story. And I mean, this is the kind of thing you learn over the years, you know. Nothing stays the way it's going to be. And sometimes you really need to like tear everything down and question what you're doing. And it wasn't a fun process getting out of the relationship with the other agent. It wasn't too bad, but and it was a lot of effort. So yes. So the negotiations themselves happened with the agent. And one of the great reasons for having an agent, in addition to getting more money for your work, is that they take care of the nitty-gritty, the financial stuff, the copyright stuff, all the extra rights that need to be negotiated, because there's a lot. And they allow authors to sort of stay pristine and stay out of that in a way. So I can deal with my editor as a writer to an editor and not, you know, be involved in questions about subsidiary rights and audiovisual rights and things. Like, I don't want to squabble with my editor about that stuff. I don't even want to think about it, although I know about it all, of course, but I'm talking about it with my agent. But I want to keep those two worlds as separate as I can. So that's yeah. So that was how that all happened. And negotiation's a whole other thing. But if you want to talk about negotiations, I think we have a list somewhere among my lists of lists, right? The 4 rules.
We do. I'm jumping ahead. I'm like, what did I put about negotiations? Yeah, I mean, yeah, like what are your tips for being a successful negotiator, Julie?
My number one tip. Okay, so again, back to the big overall theme of the book, which is you've got to be the boss. So we have these 4 rules: the golden rule, the silver rule, the bronze rule, and one other rule. Everything is negotiable. Okay, you have to go into a contract. You have to go in keeping that in mind. You need to take your time. We all hurry too much. We all say yes too quickly. Taking your time is important. One of the big things to do as a freelancer when you're negotiating is not listen to people who flatter you. And this is very particular for writers. Oh, you know, you do so good. It's like people want to believe as a negotiating tactic that telling you you're good will make you drop your defenses a little bit. That happens surprisingly often. It's part of the whole system of getting people to write because they get exposure, that sort of thing, you know. So and I think the last thing about negotiation that I would say is, you know, you've got to listen to your instinct all the time. Now, all of this is framed by, you know, you being the boss and not being the employee. Like negotiations, I think the most important thing I would say that frames all of those rules, and they're in the book, you can get the details in the book, is that you've got to understand what your client wants. And it sounds like I'm going back to like being an employee, but it's not. It's never a good idea for me not to know what they expect. I always have to know what that is. And you can spend a lot of time, you know, I think going too quickly in negotiations is really a problem. You need to spend a fair bit of time digging with people and figuring out what it is that they really expect. I think you'd asked a question. I think you had put on the list of questions that you wanted to talk about service offers, right? Which I don't do very much. But we do have in the book, we do have a sort of a description of how to put together a service offer. And one of the most important things is like negotiations come at the end. The process of doing it is presenting something as a bargaining position and then finding out what it is they want. Where are the places where, you know, you can be adjusting your price, adjusting your offer according to, you know, what their expectations are. And that's what puts you in the driver's seat. You know, figuring what your client's needs are is one of the things that makes you more able to answer those needs and not, and also be very confident about what you're asking for that in return. Does that make sense?
It does. And Julie, when you were talking right now, what really jumped out was you mentioned that we can say no.
Yeah, we can say no. So you want to hear about how to say no?
Well, yeah, because I think it's very
Yeah,
hard, when you've got your own business, there's so much pressure to have money coming in, but it might not always be the best situation for us. And there
yeah,
may be things coming on the plate that it's like, oh my gosh, like this just doesn't feel right. So yeah, like how do we
yeah.
say no?
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing because it is very hard to say no when you're starting out. Um, and again, I'm back to the idea that you feel a bit like an employee. You feel like you're a little bit have to go along with what people are saying. Um, and again, heed your instincts. If you feel like you're being exploited, you probably are. Um, I have this little list and it's just kind of fun. We did an interview with Sonali Karnik on CBC, and she just loved this. And she's like, I need this list. I know how to. So I'll go over the list really quickly because it's just kind of cute. But the real point is you really do have to learn that there are moments when it's okay to say no. And it feels like you're taking a risk by turning down some work, but sometimes it's not bad. So here we go. I don't have time. This is not my specialty. I don't do this type of work. I don't understand the order. The order is not realistic. The project is not interesting enough. I'm not interested. The deadline is too short. The deadline is too long. The job doesn't pay enough. The job involves more work than I'm being paid for. The terms are not good. There were problems with the last order. My partner won't let me work at that price, which I use sometimes, and he won't. The expenses are too high for me. I know other buyers who would be interested. I can't start working on it till next month, which is kind of a way of, it's kind of a way of putting things off, putting off a no. And finally, what we call the bomb is, I don't like the way you are treating me. And this I've used, and I've said no recently to a ghostwriting contract that was very, very potentially lucrative, but I truly didn't like the way I was being treated, and I walked out on it. So yeah. Now it's important at any stage of your career. As I said, it's harder when you're younger, but I think it's good to learn it when you're starting out. I think it's good to heed your instinct and, you know, watch out for those points where it's really not in your interest. And of course, everyone's worked for bad clients. Did you want to talk about bad clients? I'm taking
Yes, because
over.
because you have some good ideas on how to avoid them. And this is something that I think we would all like to know. Like, how do we avoid these bad clients, Julie? Please help us.
Yeah. Well, maybe when we're in the question period, people would like to talk a little bit, like I'd like, about what bad clients are. But they're like clients who don't pay on time or don't pay at all. We've all had those. All freelance writers have had those. It's a nightmare. People who ghost you, people who make big promises about, what a project is going to be. And there's lots of reasons people can turn out to be a bad client. They can sometimes not be the person in charge of actually in charge. That's happened to me a fair bit. But we do have rules about how to avoid them. And again, when you have the feeling that you're getting into this situation. So, the first one is that prevention is the best medicine. If you have a bad feeling about somebody because they don't really seem to understand the deadline or how long it takes to work, there's a little clue sometimes that somebody really doesn't understand what they're trying to purchase. It's a red light. If they say something like, let's see how things go, instead of laying down conditions very clearly, yeah, that's a red light, run. Fancy talk. Yeah, sometimes, people can make fancy speeches and try to impress you with jargon and lingo, and they try to pitch themselves as something they're not. Unnecessary terminology, a monologue that sounds rehearsed. It's not an easy situation to be in when you're negotiating with somebody who's not speaking clearly about things. I think I mentioned earlier flattery. Did I? Yes. Flattery is the worst thing in the world. And when someone flatters you, it's a negotiating technique. They're trying to get something out of you, Oh, you're a great writer. This is going to give great exposure to you, like the number of times we've heard that, so take the time you need. And I mentioned this earlier as well. It's never a good idea to be rushed. And if someone's rushing you, that's a red flag. There can be lots of reasons for wanting to get something done quickly. There can be lots of reasons for wanting to get a contract going. But if you don't feel like you have the time to properly discuss the terms, that's a bad client, and that's something you should avoid. The golden rule of dealing with bad clients is to get everything in writing. I don't know if I have to even go into that. We can talk about that more in detail if people have questions about that. But, contracts, ideally, emails with conditions if you're not working in a situation where there's a contract, emails with things written down. And this can be important for you if, for instance, they don't pay, and you have proof of the assignment and so on. What else do we have here? Keep it professional. On your end, it's always a good idea to keep things professional. People sometimes will want to get casual as a negotiating technique, to sort of get wear your barriers down. Yeah, you're nodding. Like you've been through this. So that it's important to always just keep things very professional. And this is more important even when you're working with people and like. Things can get fuzzy and conditions can change, and crap can happen sometimes when you're working with friends and you don't keep things. You can forget to be clear. You can forget to ask for certain conditions that you need. Yeah, never turn the other cheek. Here we're back to the idea of, not acting like an employee. And it's really, really important to remember that the customer is not always right. They really, truly aren't. Your job my job is to deliver something good, and their job is to support me, while I'm working. And if that's not happening, then, that's another red flag. What else do I have? I have something called act on it. Yeah. Yeah, I guess don't sit on it when things are going south and something's not working out or you're not being paid. You shouldn't be shy and you should get on it right away. So avoiding bad clients is a question of listening to your gut. And it's hard even for experienced writers to heed our gut. And it's, I can think of half a dozen experiences off the top of my head when I wasn't heeding my gut. But I can think of another half a dozen when I did. And sometimes it means walking away from things that look very promising. But it's not a good habit to get into, saying yes to people who you should be saying no to.
Jeez. Can you share one of those stories with us, Julie, of how you've walked away? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess the biggest one, the recent one was this ghostwriting contract that I mentioned earlier, which was bad rule number 2, which is that it was working partly with a friend who had brought in another scholar, and they wanted to write this book together. And I didn't realize until I was sort of. So the way I would set up typically a ghostwriting situation is that I would have a part of the contract where it gives me some time to see what their expectations are and see how they understand what's going on. And then, so say I will write a book proposal with a ghostwriting client, and then we'll write the book afterwards. It'll be like 2 separate things. But one has to lead to the other. Like there's got to be a period where we let things go, whether we're sort of figuring out what we want to do, and then we have to nail it down in a contract. Otherwise, I can't sort of be in a situation without a contract working with it. So I didn't realize until it was almost too late that this particular client wanted me to write the proposal and then wanted me to keep writing the book bit by bit without nailing down a contract. And I was working with, his colleague who brought the contract to me was my friend. and I had to at one point, we got close to signing the contract, and I prepared a contract for this person, and then he would find a little thing in it and say, no, I don't want to sign that contract, and that happened twice. And then the second time I realized, okay, this is all of what I've just been writing about bad clients. Like, he was flattering me, he was using fancy stuff, like pulling stuff out of thin air to try and justify why. And basically he just didn't want to commit to a contract. And, I told him he wasn't treating me fairly, and I walked out. And it was probably like a year, 6 months, a year of work. Like, it was a really big contract. But what would it have brought me to be working with somebody who was, like all the things I just said about a bad client, yeah. So just to reassure everybody, like, you can go a long way before you sometimes realize this stuff. And even I, as decades of experience writing, like, I still get caught up in this, thinking like I'm at somebody's disposal a little bit, and then I snap back to my self-employed entrepreneur self, and I got the heck out of there.
It's so hard because we want to believe the best in everyone, and
I know, and it's
not
exciting.
all.
Writing is what we do. We want to, we want to write,
Yeah.
we want to create ideas, we want it to happen. But yeah, have to be a business person at the same time. Yeah.
Oh. And actually, speaking of being a business person, like so much of us, there's always pressure to find new clients, find more jobs. Like, Julie, how do we find new clients, especially for those who are listening tonight, who are on the hunt?
Well, okay, in the book we have a list of finding new clients, and I think we talk mainly about, because it's a book that's written for entrepreneurs of all types, right? This wasn't specifically written for writers, although it was inspired by our experience. So, it's like pretty simple, um, pick up the phone, write them a letter, have a video conference. I mean, the idea of finding clients is that you have to put yourself out there. And I guess what I would say, again, who your clients potentially might be. No matter what sort of type of writing you're doing, or what field you're in, you have to reach out to people. And I gotta say, like, we sort of split this off from the social media part of the book, but in reality, I would say, like, a lot of the way I find new clients now is being very present on LinkedIn, for instance, and people reach out to me, or I reach out directly to them as they come up. But it's still the same thing. It's still like me deciding that I'm interested in working for somebody and sending something out. As writers, we are less, we have less incentive to pick up the phone and find clients, much more incentive to write emails to clients. We can draw on our skills. We're convincing. I mean, that's what we do. So, specifically to writers, I would say that, you have to write, you have to put together, careful explanations of what you're interested in doing for somebody, how you're interested in working with them, and get that out. Yeah. Networking is also very important, and I didn't leave it as part of finding new clients, but it's super, super important. And that, of course, is part of what social media is now. Like, that's part of what we do, but getting out of the house and meeting people is still really important. Most of my work now, not my books necessarily, but my translation work, the smaller contracts that I work on, most of that comes from quite local sources of people that I've met, not and interacted with.
You do a combination of virtual as well as in-person networking? Like, do you do a lot of events that way, or?
I do much more. Yeah, I should be clear about that. I do much more virtual now, like since the pandemic. I think everyone does. And I meet people and I set up coffees. I had a virtual coffee with somebody last week to talk about, and you can do that. You can just reach out to somebody I mean, in this case, he reached out to me, someone I didn't know, someone who'd seen my posts and was interested in what I was doing, and set up a coffee. I've got another one next week. I mean, that's more and more what's going on, and they're fun. I mean, I actually make a coffee. I turn on and I actually take time and just sort of see where it's going. I mean, it's just it's hard to. I found the transition between being out and networking in person a lot, which the opportunities just aren't there as much anymore. I found the transition a little tough between that, the pandemic, and then getting into this new mode. But it has a lot of potential. It makes it really easy to talk to people more or less in person who, aren't in my city necessarily, so I find that really good. So I'd strongly suggest setting up virtual coffees. I was delighted and sort of flattered that these two people last week would just ask me to, and I'm happy to take 15 minutes. Anybody who's being approached by someone who's that interested in them and that interested in what they're doing, anybody's going to be willing to take a few minutes and have a chat. I think anyway, we'll see.
This may be kind of a silly question, but with LinkedIn, do you use LinkedIn Pro or just regular LinkedIn?
I use regular. I tried Pro, and I found that it was more adapted to, what was it? Selling, like selling a thing. Like I found that it would be useful for me to do that. And I'm more interested in building a market, building a community, which has taken a while to take off, but now is working pretty well. So no, so LinkedIn Pro was quite expensive. I'm sure there are people who have some like very specific goals that it would be useful for them, but mine was really just like getting my name out there, making contact with people, creating these kinds of spaces and conversations. And it's worked out pretty well for that. I post, what I'm doing, what's going on, reviews or podcasts that I do. But I post a lot of information just generally about freelancing. I mean, I just find interesting stuff all the time, kind of inspirational things. I found a little article about, why companies love freelancers so much. I posted it on a Friday. I said, hey, everybody, like this is a nice, like morale raising kind of way to end the week, and I like that. I mean, it's a nice way to, well, we're isolated as freelancers, so it's a nice way to feel like you're developing some kind of community. So yeah.
And how frequently do you post, Julie?
Depends on the week, but 3 times, kind of every other day. I'll take a week off if I've just got too much going on. But then sometimes there's a lot to post. Sometimes there's like a lot of interesting articles that sort of, run that pop up in my alerts. Yeah, that's how I do it. I just like have Google alerts for everything that's on freelancing and self-employment, and then I just kind of go through it, and if I find something interesting, up it goes. So yeah, and I get good reactions, good impressions. So it's fun. It's not a big time suck. Like it's not, I don't spend an hour a day doing it. I can't, and like I don't know. This is another thing about being a freelancer. Like, my work has to be varied. I have to have my foot in my hand in a lot of things at once to make a living as a writer. So if I was just working on one thing, if I was just working on this book going solo, and devoted all my energy to it, I would go about this completely differently. I would be on Medium or Substack. I would be generating content. I would be doing, but like I can't do that. I have books to write and articles to write and things to translate. I have a lot to do. So I've found something that I think is quite workable. And I would, recommend it. And LinkedIn works well. The only reason I switched from Facebook, of course, is that I can't post media links on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So that was the end of that. But I like what's going on with LinkedIn. And I'm thinking of moving into possibly into Substack as well and producing some content, but we'll see.
Nice. There were some things, Julie, when I was reading Going Solo that really jumped out at me. And this one is, I think, is very good news for us, for freelancers. You say, as a self-employed worker who earns $25,000, $250,000 a year, they don't work 10 times more than someone who works
Yeah.
who earns. Let me try this again, everyone. Okay, so a self-employed worker who earns $250,000 a year doesn't work 10 times more than someone who earns 25,000. And can you elaborate on this? Because I was like,
Well, first of all, I don't earn $250,000 a year, but I wish I did. Well, I wish I did, but on a very good year, maybe. Okay, back to like being not being an employee and not thinking like an employee. So an employee will think that if they want to earn 10 more, they 10, I mean, get a job that pays better, but also work a lot more. The key to being self-employed and the entrepreneurial part of being self-employed is identifying the potential that you have to make more money with what you've got. So you need to, so one of the things that shapes the kind of projects that I work on and the ideas I decide to develop is where they're going to go. So, you know, I mentioned the fact that going solo was something we were just sitting on, right? Like the French book was just sitting there and the content was there. And so we essentially used our copyright to generate more income. The book on my second book on the French language was something that generated a whole bunch of other revenue streams. And, you know, that was my first experience doing that per se. But, you know, we invested in something, a lot of time and a lot of energy in something that then turned into, it was a book originally, and then it turned into a series of conferences. We made a radio show out of it. We've been working on and off on a film documentary series that will hopefully someday get filmed. But, you know, we've been paid in the meantime to do that. That's the kind of stuff you need to find stuff that will generate more income without you starting back at scratch all the time. Otherwise, you're a gig worker, like you are. And, you know, that's okay. People as freelancers can work gigs and not develop their own copyright. And of course, we earn more money because we get better at it, right? So that's we get more efficient. But our approach has been to try and identify things that would bring us more money without us doing more work necessarily. Yeah. And I think that goes for I mean, I think that's like the root of entrepreneurs, period. And maybe that's what makes us, even though we're, you know, my partner and I are creators and in some respect artists, that's the entrepreneurial part of our career. And we're not the only creators who have thought that way, obviously. It's you know, but it's good to plant that seed and early in your career, I think, just to think about what's going to bring me stuff in the long run, what's going to bring me money in the long run.
we have a question here, Julie. How do I pivot or find new clients or expand a market when my current writing expertise and client base is very niche?
Niche. Wow. Well, it would help to know what the niche is. It's a good question. I mean, when I started out, everybody told us we had to be very like focused on a very specific area, and that was how we could build a career. And I never really did that. Although I do have, you know, particular things, global health grant writing. Okay. Wow. Well, that does sound like you know,
Yeah.
okay. So if I had experience in global health grant writing, I would be looking at my expertise in health, I assume. Perhaps Kelly, you can tell me in the chat if you have expertise in health. And then I would be looking at the other kinds of avenues for that. Now, I'm not a person who's done a lot of trade writing or professional writing or any of that. I've basically stuck to like media and translation, like traditional media and translation. But I would take my expertise and then I would go see what else there is out there that's, you know, where I can use that kind of thing. Grant writing is also a skill to be honest, that you can be adapted to anything. Everybody needs grant writing in every field. And I'm not sure the fact that you are working specifically in global health would prevent you from writing excellent grants for other organizations that are related. So I would be looking at the organizations in health, Masters in Public Health, Project Management, and years of international experience. No one pays grant writers. Whoa, no, lots of people pay grant writers. My impression was it was a very lucrative field. I would look into that, and I would try to hook up with other grant writers, because as far as I know, it's quite a lucrative field. There's definitely a big need for it. I would contact university communications departments, because they're the ones who are looking for people to help people, especially doctors and so on, who typically don't know how to write very well. So hope that's helpful. Are there other questions? Oh.
No, we don't have any other ones here.
So did we
Yeah,
cover
so anyone, please, like, we've got this wonderful expert here, so please send your questions our way. One of the things that I was really curious about, Julie, oh,
Yeah,
is you collaborate with your husband. So for writers who might be, or business people who are intimidated about working with someone else, how do you collaborate with another writer effectively?
yeah,
Like,
that's a
what
good
would your
question.
process be?
Yeah, well, I collaborate with my husband, and it's funny because we joke about this, but it's easier to write books together than it is to renovate a house together for us. Like, it's really like we come from the same sort of school of writing, and we kind of get each other more in writing than in a lot of other things that would be useful to get. Yeah, it's special. I mean, I think one of the great things about collaborating with somebody is I think you should always find a way to have second pair of eyes on things. And obviously it's not good for every writer. But it's very, very, very helpful. You can become so like in love with your research and so close to what you're producing that you don't see it anymore. It's like trying to see faults in your own children. Like all you see is love, and all you see is things. So it's a hard thing to hand your stuff to somebody else and really truly let them say what they think. And it never really gets that much easier. None of us love having people critique our writing, but we need it. And so I would recommend to anybody. It also breaks the solitude of writing, I think, a little bit. As far as the process, it's a good question. I don't know if I could break it down very easily. It really depends on what we're doing. Jean and I split up. If we're writing a book together, we barge in, make a plan together, really collaboratively, brainstorming and putting the ideas together. And then we tend to split stuff up. Like, okay, you want to do that, you want to do that, as opposed to like one person doing the research and one doing the writing or something like that. We just like split everything up so that we're both doing everything. And it creates a lot of friction, which brings a lot of good, because we really like dig into stuff. And when I write crap, he tells me, and I do. And same is true when something's really off, I can see that. It's a good, I think it's a great lesson for everybody to go through. We should always be maybe part of some kind of writing group or something where you're getting feedback from people all the time. But working together as partners is a whole different level of cooperation, and I guess the key is you have to like stop your day. We didn't talk about this at all, but you have to like put barriers on your day. Like you really have to stop working and move on when you're writing with someone that you live with. Yeah, but that's a whole other part of freelancing that we haven't talked about. I mean, learning to take holidays, learning to take breaks. We don't work on weekends. Like, that's the difficult thing about being a boss. And the insecurity of being a freelancer will lead you to want to be writing all the time and producing all the time and not stopping the clock. But you can't keep it up if you do that. You really have to set your hours pretty clearly, set your boundaries with people you're working with, and people who run businesses know how to do that. You have every right to say you're not working on the weekends, and you're not working after 6 p.m. and you're not answering texts, after working hours.
Yay. It's possible to be successful with boundaries. I think this is also good
There to
news.
have boundaries, I think, to be successful. I mean, people burn out. Like it's a rough game being a writer. People criticize your writing, people, all in, good intentions, often, sometimes not so much. It's a rough game. It's hard on the ego. And, you need to, I'm very, very careful to have a lot going on in my life that takes me straight out of writing. And I think that's good advice for anybody. Don't get too sucked into it, because, in the long run, you'll just end up with, chronic chronic joint problems, you know, carpal tunnel in your wrist. It's tough.
We have another question, Julie, all the way from the Western Arctic.
Wow.
Okay, so yes, we have a filmmaker, video journalist, living in the Western Arctic. Tips on negotiating with smaller publishers, nonprofits. I'm just going to expand on this here, and then I'll go back to the question. I got approached by a local news organization recently where they asked if I could cover them directly on the ground for a um, news and a budget without them clarifying what their budget was, then only to turn around and say, sorry, we've decided to do it in-house. Is
Yeah.
it to push to ask them to clarify, to go back? Is it to push them to ask them to clarify, to go back to the table? Is it too pushy to ask them? Sorry, I'm just trying to, is it too pushy to ask to clarify? Yeah, can you ask them to go back to the table?
Sure, I would say so. Absolutely. If you're interested in the topic, and they've flip-flopped, it might not be a final decision, if I'm understanding correctly, that they may have, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, like one of the most important things about negotiating is understanding your clients and what they need. And you may have missed something, or they may have presumed something about what you were going to do that gave them hesitation, whether it was the price or your approach or your experience. Every kind of discussion about their needs is a learning opportunity for you. And even if it doesn't end up turning into the contract that you're going to have, that you're hoping to have right now, it will definitely show them that you're interested, that you are, professional, that you are ready to bounce back and do something else for them in the future. I mean, it's very, very, very good to follow up when you've had that kind of experience. It takes a bit of guts, not fun, because you feel in a very vulnerable situation, but you should feel entirely in your rights to ask them what happened, and civilly. I mean, over a virtual coffee, like it doesn't have to be, or whatever, or a real coffee, it doesn't have to be confrontational. But I would say, you're definitely on the right track if you go back and ask them what happened, especially since it sounds like it's somebody that could be a regular kind of thing, right? And it might be something very simple, that you could correct them on and solve. And if that's good, they win, you win, right? They're looking for a solution, and you need information from them in order to be able to give them the solution they're looking for. That's how negotiation works. So I hope that answers. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Let's check again. No, Julie, we've just got a couple minutes left here. Is there a final thought that you'd like to leave everyone with some advice or some pieces of wisdom that you can give us?
Look at my lists now. I don't know. You know what? No, I mean, what have we not, Crystal, what have we not touched on yet? Like, did we talk about, we didn't really talk about psychological hurdles to selling, did we? No, we did.
No, we didn't. We didn't, but you know what? That's actually a really big one. Let's leave on that.
Okay. Well, we identified three things that typically, make it hard for people to sell. One is a belief that they're small, and this will resonate for people starting out, that they don't have the experience, and they don't have what they need, to sell what they do. And that's never really true. Like if you've nobody, the fact that you're not experienced, the fact that you don't have, whatever 30 years of writing experience is not in itself going to make it impossible for you to land an idea, or land a contract with somebody. Your enthusiasm, lots of stuff comes from play. One thing that was really the second thing I was going to say was being too far. People think that like selling outside of their local industry, their local, it's a lot of people think that prevents, if it's not something local, if it's not something, in around where they work, that is going to be an obstacle, and it's not. Unsurprisingly, it's not. Like some of the most interesting work I've had has come from, strange places and other countries. It's not you shouldn't like assume that you have to work necessarily for your local market, although I think it's a good idea to do that as well. The thing that I guess the third thing is this third psychological hurdle to selling is hard work. And the bad news is like sometimes it is hard work. And you shouldn't think there's something unusual about having to do a lot of work to sell something. I spent 6 months writing the proposal for my first book. 6 months. It was a big undertaking, and then another 6 months selling it. But you've got to have faith in yourself. It's gonna be a problem for your whole career if you're not able to do that. So those are the hurdles, and they're all easy things to overcome. Well, easy. They can be overcome. I mean, that's the spirit of the whole book. Like there are a lot of things. It's not a joke. There are a lot of really difficult things about being self-employed, but they're all manageable. They're all, So I guess the final word of the book is like, I hope it gives people confidence. That's
Absolutely. And at any stage of your career, there really is, I mean, I can see it, I can just see it on my bookshelf and flipping through it whenever I need to consult. So it really is a very comprehensive guide. And Julie, thank you so much for coming this evening to talk to us. It's been an absolute delight. And thank you to everyone who's watching. We really appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you, Crystal. Thanks for your lovely questions.
Oh, my pleasure. And I should actually say, um, for the lovely people there as well, if for more Canadian author interviews, check out my YouTube channel. There's my little plug.
I will.
All about Canadian books.